Okay, so it's been a little while since we've done a live stream. A lot has happened since the last live stream in the world of sport, and and with the channel as well. The channel has now got full monetization and obviously had its first payout. And there's been a lot happening in the world of sport. So let's just delve in and start discussing stuff. Some very interesting moves in the transfer market. Man City have spent over 200 million pounds in trying to fix their dysfunctional season. And obviously, we've had some managerial sackings since the last live stream as well. So the transfer market is now closed in Europe for until the summer. We've seen some interesting moves in English football and in European football. And two of the interesting moves made in the transfer window was Marcus Rashford on loan to Aston Villa. It looks like he's played his last game for Manchester United. I can't see him returning from his loan spell at the end of the season and being part of Ruben Amorim's plans going forward. And Kyle Walker going on loan from Man City to AC Milan. So they're big moves that have been made, and we'll see the outcome of them. The NHL, the trade deadline is looming hard and fast, and we're going to have the Four Nations tournament coming up as well, which is going to be quite interesting to see how that dynamic works. It's sort of a dry dummy run for the Olympics next year, so we'll see how that impacts the NHL and the quality of tournament we're going to see with the Four Nations. Not everyone is sold on the format. Sort of it's similar to the World Cup of Hockey they had a few years ago. The Super Bowl is fast approaching. Can the Chiefs continue their dominance of the NFL? And can the Eagles stop them? That's going to be very, very interesting to see how that all plays out. And in regards to some other stuff, obviously the channel's now got its first payout, so we're starting to earn revenue, which is a bonus. View counts have been really, really good. The channel's grown really, really well, and we're continuing to grow. I mean, the subscriber count has continued to climb quite steadily over recent days. The view hours are starting to climb reasonably steadily as well, and we're just continuing to grow, which is really, really nice to see. So there's a lot of positivity going on with the channel right now. A lot of positivity. As you can see, my beard's gone as well, so we've freshened things up a little bit. Got rid of the grotty bin man beard. In regards to an upload schedule, we're trying to do a minimum of video per day from here forward. A minimum of a video per day. Some days will be more. Some days will just be the one video. But we're aiming to have a more structured and regular upload schedule, which I think will help the channel as well. In regards to the channel growth, I mean, honestly, the channel growth has been fantastic. It's been driven in part by a lot of views and subscribers from down under in Australia, and the UK obviously continues to have lead the channel in views. Places like the US and Canada, view counts are starting to climb back up again, which is nice to see, and we shall make more North American specific content as well, because I think the major leagues, I need to do a bit more coverage on the major leagues in North America. And with the NHL, I'm going to do a little bit more NHL content going forward. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of major sporting events coming up that are going to be really, really fun. I mean, the pre-season matches kick off in the NRL this weekend, so we're looking forward to them. We get to see some of the depth players, some of the young players coming through, and we're going to see some of the first grade regulars get run out, which would be good to see some of them. Some new players on new teams. We've done the previews for the NRL seasons. They were quite fun to do, all 17 teams. And there's been a bit happening in regards to expansion with the NRL and the collapse of the bid in Perth. I think the NRL, have made a mistake there. We know that PNG will be joining the competition in 2028 with a team based out of Port Moresby and Cairns in northern Queensland. So we'll see how that all factors in, and it'll be fun to see what they end up doing. Whether that's the right decision by the NRL is another thing. A lot of people wanted Perth to have a team, and I think it would have worked, but the NRL's decided to go in a different direction from the Bears bid, which I think is a shame not having the Bears back in the competition, personally, myself. They added a lot to the competition when they were in the competition previously. They've got a solid fan base, and they had a good junior base, and they've had some great players play for the organisation back in the day when they were a first-grade setup originally. Now, we've seen a lot of player movement. Some new coaches have been given head coaching roles. It's going to be fun to see how some teams do with the new additions. It's going to be interesting to see how some teams do with the players they've lost as well. So, can Penrith do 5 in a row, for example? Will certain teams bounce back from disappointing seasons last year? Who ends up with the wooden spoon? Who ends up with the minor premiership? Who's going to be in the grand final? Is it going to be Penrith again? Can they continue to make history? Will the Roosters have a fullback season? Will they continue to be very, very competitive going forward? So there's a lot of unknowns there. This weekend, we've got the 4th round of the FA Cup. I will try and watch as many of the games as possible. And, of course, the Six Nations as well. That's going to be interesting to try and balance FA Cup coverage with Six Nations coverage. And I'm going to try and watch as much of that over the weekend. And, of course, later on, we have the 12 Hours of Sebring coming up in less than a month's time. So that's going to be fun as well to see how that all plays out. We get to see the Aston Martin Valkyrie make its debut in endurance racing, which is going to be fun. That's a V12. It's a very, very big engine in the back of that car. And it's the only non-hybrid in the class in IMSA, in the GTP class. So that's going to be interesting to see how that performs against the more established teams that have had extra development and are a bit ahead of the curve in regards to development. So that's going to be fun to see how that all plays out. It's going to be very, very fun. It's also going to be interesting to see, the title race in the Premier League, for example. It's Liverpool's title to lose at this point. Arsenal, obviously, with that big win over Man City, have made a statement. Nottingham Forest are having a very, very good season. Brighton should not be discounted. Not Brighton, Bournemouth should not be discounted, should I say. Neither should Newcastle. Nottingham Forest, for me, is the biggest surprise in the Premier League this season with how they're playing. Putting 7 past a pretty good Brighton outfit, I think, is also a statement when there were some big wins over the weekend. And the title race is very, very interesting. I think it is Liverpool's to lose. Arne Slot has slotted in quite well as Liverpool's new manager, replacing Jurgen Klopp. Man City is a bit of an enigma this season, and Man United are a disaster. Tottenham are in serious trouble as well. I wouldn't be surprised if Ange Postecoglou loses his job, quite honestly. I think the FA Cup game coming up this weekend could be curtains. If they lose that and lose that badly, that could be curtains for him as manager at Spurs. And a lot of the Spurs fans have really well and truly had enough of the ownership and the direction the club's taking on the field. Yes, off the field, they're very, very profitable. They do make a lot of money. And that's why their class is one of the big 6 for revenue, not for success, because they're still trying to fight for that elusive piece of silverware that they haven't had since 2008. They've had 16 managers in the 24 years that Daniel Levy has been chairman. So just let that sink in. They've had a lot of managerial turnover. It is kind of worrying where the club are at if you are a Spurs fan. In regards to Man United, I think they're playing a little bit better than Spurs, but their season has also been quite disastrous, and their decline continues. And it's, as I say, Marcus Rashford, in my opinion, has played his last game for the club. I don't see him returning from his loan spell from Aston Villa back into the Manchester United setup. He hasn't played for the club for 6.5, 7 weeks. And it's very, very clear that Ruben Amorim wants to have a complete clear out and a complete rebuild should the ownership give him time. But we've been here before with every previous manager since Alex Ferguson. That full rebuild hasn't really been successful, and they continue to misfire and have missteps, even though they do continue to win silverware every so often. And by any other club's standards, that would be quite a successful period. But they haven't won the league since Alex Ferguson, and they have been all over the place in regards to transfer policy, player development, the stadium upkeep, the training grounds not at the same standard, and the youth system is not the same standard it once was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, for example. So there's clear issues within that organisation, and again, that's another fan base that is deeply, deeply frustrated with the direction that club is taking. Man City have now hit their first hiccup in a very long time with the current ownership. And this could be a trophyless season for Man City, which is nearly unheard of in recent seasons. And there is a lot of pressure on Guardiola. So we'll have to see how that all plays out and whether their form can actually bounce back or whether it will continue to be indifferent or poor, because there was a lengthy spell where they couldn't win a game. Their season's unravelled. They're not winning the title. They may do something in the FA Cup or the Champions League, but I think their title aspirations have gone. But as I say, Nottingham Forest are still in with a chance of the title race, which no one would have bet on at the beginning of the season. I think Bournemouth are having a good season as well, a very underrated season. I think people need to start taking Bournemouth more seriously. Newcastle are having a very good run as well with Eddie Howe as their manager and how he's turned that team around from when he took over to where they are. I think they should not be discounted, but it is Liverpool's to lose. Arsenal have had opportunities to compete for the title in recent seasons and have melted under pressure. And there has been some pressure on Mikel Arteta at times. So we'll see what happens with Arsenal going forward as well, whether they can finally win more silverware with Mikel Arteta, more than just an FA Cup and a couple of charity shields. It's going to be very, very interesting to see what they do, considering he's been there for some time in the manager's position. But that masterclass they did against Man City, that's a demolition job. Man City do have problems in a lot of positions. And there are players that are just not performing to the paychecks that they are earning. And so that, again, that discussion around that. Ice Hockey News obviously did a video on the IIHF and the upholding of the ban of Russia and Belarus for at least another year, 2 years minimum. I think the earliest we may see their Russia and Belarus admitted back into, let's say, the World Championships and potential future Olympic participation would be 2027, 2028, I would think. The IIHF have decided to retain the ban, and they put it into place in 2022. And so we won't see Ovechkin and Malkin at the Olympics, which is a big shame because they're two of the best Russian players that we've ever seen take to the ice in the NHL, if not all time in the sport. And so that ban is upheld. It does sort of remind me of the apartheid ban in South Africa back in the 60s, 70s and 80s into the early 90s, which was a soft tactic, soft diplomatic tactic for South Africa to change their domestic policy in regards to segregation. It did actually have the intended effect. It did contribute to apartheid being ended because it damaged South Africa's reputation on the international stage somewhat. And that did put internal pressure on the government. So that's where sport and politics collide. It can be a bit messy. It's not always a nice partnership when sport and politics mix. I do think there is pressure on organisations like the IOC, the IIHF, FIFA, for example, to reassess the bans they have in place for competition for Russia and Belarus. And of course, a ban is different to a boycott. A boycott's when a nation willingly decides not to go or attend an event of a sporting nature. The ban is a bit more permanent. So we shall see what happens there. But it's interesting to keep an eye on these things. The next time that the IIHF meet in this regard will be this time next year, basically, and then they'll reassess their position again. I can't see it changing too much, if we're being perfectly honest. I think this ban's here to stay for at least another year or two. And we'll see if at some point they do decide to change their position. But at the moment, I can't see that position changing. Six Nations. Let's discuss the Six Nations a little bit. Italy, Scotland, I think, looking at the match reviews, was the best game of the weekend. Wales are in serious trouble. And they, for me, look the weakest nation on paper, and the off-field dramas with Wales I think are worse than the off-field dramas with England in regards to club finance and the game's finances. But we are seeing a lot of unrest within the English game as well, with the relationship with the RFU and the clubs. Similar with the WRU and the regions and the clubs as well. There's clearly a poor relationship with the governing bodies and the grassroots game. In regards to a whole range of issues, finance being one of the main ones, but also arbitrary and reactionary rule changes. And so it's a watch this space. Borthwick and Gatland are under a lot of pressure. Wales's record is now 13 straight test defeats, which is a record they don't want. And England under Steve Borthwick, there's a lot of pressure on Steve Borthwick. He's made some big calls in regards to selection and captaincy as well with the Toje. And they're not playing well either. So I think I have some concerns for England and Wales going forward for this Six Nations. I think England will be more competitive than Wales. I think they'll have their share of wins and losing bonus points. But Wales, I'm really worried about the fact it's a young group. It's an inexperienced group at this level, and the depth just isn't there. The depth is just not there for them to be as competitive as the other nations in the Six Nations. I still think Ireland and France are that step ahead. Personally, I think Scotland and Italy, they played out a very, very good game, and they're going to be very, very entertaining. And they play a very attack-minded running style. England just are going to have to be pragmatic with how they approach things. And I think Wales generally just try and stick in games as long as possible and try and make things ugly and scrappy. And that's not what Wales are all about. They're all about structure and defence. A Warren Gatland philosophy, they just don't have the depth. And you've got to look at the state of the finances of the game. But rugby union is a sport which has got very precarious financial footing right now as a sport. And I do think World Rugby have definitely got things wrong in regards to the financial side of the game, let alone some of the really bizarre law changes or rule changes, depending on how you look at it and how you word things. In regards to the 20-minute red card is just not necessary. It's another added layer of bureaucracy and over officiating the game doesn't need. I don't think it helps anything personally. As I think it's an unnecessary rule change that will not benefit the game. I think it will hinder the game. We've seen a lot of reactionary rule changes and arbitrary rule changes or law changes, if you want to be really technical, to rugby union in recent years that I just don't think the sport needs. I just don't think rugby union needs all these rule changes, however you want to word it. Doesn't need them. Does not need them. It does not help anything. It really is frustrating as a fan watching how the game has evolved at times. There's a lot of issues with the game. Two areas that really need fixing are tackle technique and the scrum, and it doesn't appear to be fixed properly and addressed properly. Which is why we have the class action lawsuit for head injuries and injuries in general against World Rugby and the various unions, and why also the scrum is continuing to be a mess, and it's very confusing for new fans to the game to understand what's actually going on, because existing fans and those who played the game, such as myself, don't have a freaking clue what's going on anymore. And I've been watching and playing the game since I was 3 years old. Been watching the game since I was a kid. Been playing the game since the age of 7 till the age of 21. I don't have a clue what's going on in a scrum anymore. And I used to be a second row and a back row forward in times at school grade. And I have no idea what's going on in a scrum anymore. I remember our scrum forward training was quite simple drills. You drive straight, you feed the ball straight, you hook the ball, and you try and compete to go forward and pump your legs and drive straight. We're just not doing that anymore. And that's taught from a young age to wheel a scrum, deliberately play for penalties, deliberately play for free kicks, and deliberately put the feed so wonky it's on a different latitude and longitude to anything else. It's just frustrating, and how confusing it is when the referees are trying to officiate that area of the game. It's a key component. At this point, we might as well go to non-contested. At this point, it's such a mess. At which point you lose a key component of the game, of a restart, of a set play, and also a counter-attacking set play where the opposition, forward pack can win against the feed, which is very rare these days. Rarely happens. It used to happen quite regularly. If you had a good technical scrum that could out scrummage the opposition on defensive ball, you just don't see that anymore. So you've lost several key components of the set play anyway, and the game has lost something because the scrum time has become such a mess that it's nearly uncontestable, which is the whole point of having that as a potential reset to the game. And World Rugby, formerly the IRB, has got to take some responsibility for the mess that has become a key component of the game. And I did a video discussing how I feel that the scrum laws need completely overhauling and taking back to basics that we saw 20, 30 years ago, because it's a key skill that's been lost for the hooker. It's a key skill that's been lost for actually the scrum half feeding the ball properly. And it's a complete mess because you've got opposition front rows playing for penalties, rather than playing to win the ball as quickly as possible and restart play and compete for it. Rugby league has got its own issues in regards to disciplinary rule changes and how the disciplinary committees work. And again, it's you're not going to get head contact out of the game. Unfortunately, it's a byproduct of a brutal contact sport. Accidental head contact will happen and will continue to happen. It's how you mitigate that injury, and it's how you make sure the players are fit to return to play after suffering a head injury. And it's also about penalising deliberate foul play. There's a way to know when a player is deliberately headshotted another player. You can tell. Body language gives it away. Eye contact gives it away. Tackle technique gives it away. There's mistimed and then there's deliberate, and it's very, very obvious which is mistimed and which is deliberate. We also, in both codes, don't reward the low tackle as much as we should. A good solid man and ball low tackle or a good man and ball dump tackle is not rewarded in the way it should be. So good defence is not rewarded, at which point you get other players coming into the tackle area, which then increases the risk of head contact from two defending players clashing together or clash of heads or a high shot. It raises the risk intensely because we're not rewarding a dominant low tackle or just a dominant tackle in general. And of course, we've seen a raft of rule changes in the NRL and Super League as well in regards to speeding up the play the ball, the 6 again rule, reducing it to back to 1 ref in the NRL, for example. And they try to speed up play, which then brings in the fatigue factor, which creates space. And we are seeing some lopsided scores and some blowout scores, but at the same time, there was a lot of issues around deliberately slowing down the play the ball and slowing down the tackle area, which was frustrating that it became a very sluggish part of the game, which made it easier to defend, which then kept scorelines a lot lower for a lot longer. And it made the game a bit more scrappy. There was a bit more stop-start. There was more penalties, more free kicks given away at that point. So there have been some positive changes and some unattended consequences with said rule changes. But I think coaches and teams are adapting to these rule changes, which I think suits the game. We've got a faster paced game now than what we had 10 years ago. So in that regard, I think that's definitely had a positive impact. But then you've got sides that haven't quite adapted as well. So you do get lopsided blowout scorelines every now and then. Some teams have continued to struggle with the 6 again rule, for example. In regards to the channel growth, and I want to touch back on this, it's been good to see. November and December was a bit of a grind. Not going to lie, it was a bit of a grind. The last couple of weeks, we've seen view counts and subscriber growth we haven't seen for some time. And it's refreshing to see that, and it's also nice to be rewarded financially. As I said in one of my recent videos in regards to advice I would give to anyone starting out on the platform wanting to make content for the first time or make content on this platform for the first time, treat it as a hobby. Go in with a mindset of focus in regards to what you want to, and limit expectations. So when you reach those expectations and you go past that, that's a good positive bonus. I've always tried to give as much help and advice to others as possible because I've had my frustrations on the platform over the years. I have had my frustrations over the years, and so with the lessons I've learned and imparting that experience out there, I think hopefully I can help others in regards to making a good, successful career, should we say, or make a success of their channel or channels and have a good, fulfilling time on the platform. There has been times where it has been exceptionally frustrating, especially when YouTube keeps changing the monetization rules, for example, and earning rules and terms of service. There are things that YouTube could do better and fairer, in my opinion. It's not a perfect system. I think they should probably allow monetization to come sooner, potentially. I think that would benefit both YouTube and the creators, but we are where we are with the current rule sets and the current criteria, and we have to work within that framework. And so, as I say, if subscribe accounts continue to grow and money continues to come in, that's a bonus because we built a very good, very good community here. I'm not ashamed to say I'm quite happy with the community we built here, and the Boffs Army, as I like to call it. I think I'm quite happy, as I say, with the community we built over many years. I think it's a fun community. I think we've got some great subscribers and members. We have a really vibrant comment section. Sometimes it gets a little bit colourful, but you can't control what every keyboard warrior wants to put down. But for the most part, we have a very interesting and diverse subscriber base and viewer base. And again, one of the bits of advice I would give is regularly interact with the comment section as best as possible, engage as much as possible with that comment section and your subscribers and members. I think it's the best way to grow a community and to grow a fan base and to build a good basis going forward. I mean, I've got over 1,400 subscribers now. It does get harder to keep on top of this of the comment section at times. Some videos there's a lot of comments, other videos it's not as many comments. Some subscribers and viewers comment more than others. Some would rather just watch and like and share, and that's their comfort zone. But I've noticed some of my subscribers have been subscribed to the channel for 4, 5, 6 years, 7 years, and I've stuck around when times weren't great on the channel. And every so often I'll take a day or two or a couple of days just to take a little break and a bit of a refresh and try and keep myself mentally switched on, because burnout is a thing. Burnout is a massive thing, and you'll notice some YouTubers won't post content for a long time and take a massive step back from creating content, and that's it. That is a shame. I think it's a massive shame when a creator feels that they need to take a lengthy break or give up altogether. I think that's unfortunate. Some do it for economic reasons. They found other work, or they've moved, or their interests have changed. Others just get burnt out and just it's not for them anymore. And it's a shame when that happens. And I think there are ways to mitigate that and to work around that. And but everyone's different. Every creator's different. Every channel's different. Every subscriber base and viewership base is different. And so it is what it is. Some channels, the content ages really well. Other channels, the content doesn't age really well. And it looks pretty cringe a few years after it's done or a few months after it's done. Doesn't age well. Which is unfortunate, but it's the way trend work. It's the way social media works. Some things at the time seem a good idea, and then a few months or a few years later, you look back and go, "Oh, I shouldn't have done that," or "I regret doing that," or "It didn't age well." I mean, but for all intents and purposes, I'm quite happy with where the channel's trending and where the channel's at. I think the growth's been really good. I think the channel's in a good, healthy place. It's got a good, solid base going forward, and I can see things working out really, really well. But it takes time and effort. And so when I talk about the work-life balance, it's getting that right. I still have a regular day job. I work 5 days a week, and I'm trying to balance the channel with the day job and working out when to take time off work from the day job, balance out with this, and also try and keep on top of as much live sport as possible. For 12 months of the year it's challenging at times. It is challenging. But I think, as I say, the community we built here has been quite a positive community. The feedback, the comment section is always, lively, and it's sometimes really interesting to read what people have put, especially when it's on a controversial issue or a very divisive topic. So let's say, for example, the Paul Kent videos I did were well received, actually. Well received. There were some very funny comments as well. There was not a lot of sympathy towards Paul Kent, the Australian journalist. Evening, Tommy. How is it going? Obviously up in Wales. It's not often that I do a weekday live stream these days. It's more of a weekend thing, but this weekend I wasn't at home. I was away for a long weekend with some friends, so I wasn't at home. I had a 3-day weekend. I had a day off, so I went up to spend some time with some good friends of mine, have a weekend away. I still did some content, but there was other things to keep us busy. I'm getting there. I'm plodding along. Life isn't perfect, but I'm plodding along. I'm a lot happier now than what I was before Christmas. Before Christmas, I was in a bit down in the dumps. Is a good way to describe it. Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, Wales are in trouble when it comes to their test side. And Warren Gatland, I mean, whether he's the right guy to fix the problems or work with the WRU as in the head coaching role, there's a reason why he gave it up the first time. Some of his press conferences, though, and some of his questions answers to journalist questions, should I say, leave me scratching my head somewhat. In the simple fact that how could he not be aware of the ongoing financial problems? They've been well documented. They're well discussed. They were there when he was there in 2019 for the World Cup. They're still there now. Not a lot has really changed. If anything, it's got worse. I've never liked Gatland's rugby either, but it was effective. But unfortunately, that meant I apparently had a bias or a dislike for Welsh rugby players and the Welsh national side. According to quite a few Welsh Rugby Union fans, I've had my run-ins in, especially in 2018 and 2019. I really had my run-ins with some Welsh rugby fans, and they got pretty toxic. And in the end, it just made me laugh because now, fast forward a few years, I'm sorry, the team is shit. The Welsh Union has let the regions and the club game in Wales down badly. No, well, look, I mean, Rugby Union spent many, many years in Wales trying to hamper rugby league that they didn't focus on their own backyard. Yes, Jonathan Davis and a few of the other rebels who went over to league wanted to do so for financial reasons, and you can't blame them. And you can now see why they did that. And they've tried to hinder and hamper rugby league in Wales for as long as I can remember. But in reality, they need to focus on themselves before worrying about what another sport's doing. I think because of the economics of Wales and the economy of Wales, that doesn't help as well. There's not a lot of money floating around in Welsh people's pockets in a lot of areas. There's a lot of areas that are very agricultural, and the agricultural industries are struggling. And there's a lot of areas that have lost their major industries, or heavy and medium manufacturing has moved away or is downsized. And so there's not a lot of money in people's pockets. And you look at the football clubs, they're all foreign owned. Apart from Newport, Wrexham, Swansea and Cardiff have all got foreign ownership, because domestic ownership, someone wealthy from Wales or from the UK just doesn't want to invest in Welsh football. So even football, while it's doing a lot better and the crowd numbers are better and the clubs are doing better, and, there's a lot of attention on Welsh football because of Wrexham and because of Swansea and Cardiff having been Premier League clubs at various points, and Swansea actually winning silverware and playing in Europe and all this. It is just what it is. You're in two countries at the same time. The other day, I had a half a pint each side of the pub. I've done that before. I've been in Wales and I've been in Wales and England at the same time. When I was a kid, a family friend has a farm where part of his farm is in England and part of his farm is in Wales. Part of the farmhouse, I think the bathroom is in England and the farmhouse is in Wales or something. So you're taking a shit in England and then you're taking a piss in Wales. It was just weird. But I was a kid at the time, but that was quite funny. It's an interesting one. It's like Chester City's football ground, for example, where part of the stadium's in Wales and the car park's in Wales, I think, and then part of the stadium is in England. The border between England and Wales is shifted historically over time, and so what we have today is different to in previous centuries. And so it's just a mess, and then you have to ask questions of the planning applications, and especially with a club like Chester, for example, that's had well documented financial issues. The original club, and now this is the successor club, and so this is where talking about the COVID regs and how sports funding and sports loans and grants were given. That was a mess in itself, because we have so many different governing bodies at a regional level. And then at a UK level, it just made an absolute mess of sports finances, which is again another reason why certain sports are struggling. Yeah, can't look. Yeah, Cardiff's an interesting one. Cardiff have been teetering on relegation to League One for a while. They're not the side they were. Ownership is a big part of the problem there. The owners, the Town family, are not very popular with the fan base, and the club is not where it wants and needs to be. Swansea the same. Swansea are not where they want and need to be. At the moment, the bright spot in Welsh football is Wrexham, because they've got ownership willing to invest, rebuild the stadium, invest in the community, whereas Swansea and Cardiff, ownership is part of the problem. Yeah, Bournemouth are doing very, very well. I think they're one of the surprise packages this season, but they've become an established Premier League side now. But what they're doing right now is pretty amazing. And for one of the foreign-owned clubs, because the ownership at Bournemouth also has interests in the NHL with the Vegas Golden Knights. That's their ownership. They're doing things the right way in regards to building the club's fortunes here. Normally, when you get a North American owner who's already got a North American sports franchise, they try and run it like Todd Bowley, and they make a lot of errors. Well, it's 11,000 for the state. No, the Bournemouth metro area and the wider urban area around Bournemouth. I think they could definitely expand that stadium a little bit. I think they've got more fans than 11,000. I can tell you that. And I could see potential stadium expansion at some point, especially if they get into Europe or regularly get into Europe. That's going to bring more money to the club, more interest to the club, and more potential investment and eyes on the product. I can see them potentially expanding the stadium. 20,000, yeah, sure. I honestly think they could definitely expand their facilities. But there's a reason why the stadium's smaller. They spent most of their existence in the lower leagues. There was one point they nearly fell out the Football League. So they spent most of their existence in the lower leagues. It's only in the last decade or so that they've been at the top table and been very consistent at the top table. They've only had one season outside the top flight since they first entered the Premier League. So I do think a bigger stadium or expansion of the stadium is on the cards. I think they've got a very good, solid facility that they can build upon. They've got good ownership with good, really deep pockets. It's not as if I forget what his name. I forget the owner's name, but he owns he's a part owner of the Vegas Golden Knights. He's got deep pockets. He's a very wealthy individual, and so they've got a lot of money behind them. And I think it's Foley is his name. He's a very wealthy individual. He's one of the wealthiest Americans. The Vegas Golden Knights has made him a lot of money with their success in the NHL, including winning the Stanley Cup and being to 2 Stanley Cup finals since 2018. And success breeds success. So they are in a very good position, which is rare for having an American owner. But the way the club's run is run how an English club should be run. And I don't think they're overextending themselves. I think they've built a very good system, a very good culture, and they've got some very good young players, which is terrifying. And if they can hold on to those young players, I think they can definitely take that next step and start competing for silverware. Don't be surprised to see Bournemouth try and actually compete for some silverware sooner rather than later. I honestly believe that. I think Plymouth, because their nearest rivals are Exeter and Torquay. They are a bigger club when it comes. Plymouth's a bigger urban area than Torquay, and Exeter in regards to population, it's a bigger city than Exeter. And Torquay's, again, a sizable population centre in Devon, but the club is a lot lower down the football pyramid. Exeter's a well-run club, a solid club. But I think the issue with Plymouth Argyle is not the fan base. I think it's how the club is run. I think how the club is run is what's hindering Plymouth. It's not the fan base. The fan base is there. The whole city is Plymouth mad, Argyle mad. It's to do with the ownership and some of the decisions the owners have taken, and the constant managerial turnover is not helping them. Exeter, you could argue it's more rugby, but at the same time, the football club has been a professional club longer than the rugby club, and so As I say, in my opinion, Exeter's a very solid sporting city, and they're both university cities as well, which helps. And a lot of university students who go to Exeter and go to Plymouth actually stay in those areas as well, and contribute locally. Rooney and Gerrard not turning into great managers. I think Rooney's couple of seasons at Derby, his win percentage was his best that he's had, and since then it's been a bit of a disaster. Gerrard did decent at Rangers, and then it's gone wrong. I wouldn't say Gerrard's terrible. I just wouldn't say he's great. Lampard is actually doing well at Coventry since he's been there, and he did well at Derby when he was initially there, and he did decent at Chelsea with the resources available. Everton, it just didn't work. I think out of the three, Gerrard's won the silverware, but in an easy league to win silverware when you're Rangers and Celtic. I think Lampard is the best out of the three in regards to his win percentage and style of play, but as I say, they're from the same era of playing talent. They're all great players, but I would say superstar players don't always make superstar managers. And so normally it's that depth player who makes the better manager, or the player who's played in the lower leagues, who's spent a lot of time grinding away at the game. They tend to make better managers in any league system around the world. The player who's generally the hardcore squad player, but occasionally you get like an Ancelotti, for example, or a Cesar Maldini who ends up being a pretty good manager. But for the most part, it's normally your depth players, your squad players, your lesser known players who tend to be the better managers because they spend a lot more time studying the game, a lot more time on the bench, for example, and they tend to be better. Sky Sports have extended their contract with the Darts till 2030. I mean, that is important in regards to the planning that the PDC can make in regards to finances, sponsorship deals, and investment. So whenever a media contract is extended, that shows stability and it shows growth, and that will attract potential new sponsors to the product. So that is a positive. The new stadium at Everton. Yeah, I mean, it's cost them a lot of money. There's been some issues with the stadium building, the construction of the stadium. It's going to be a shame to see Goodison gone. It's a shame that Everton couldn't do to Goodison what Liverpool have done to Anfield, Everton's original stadium. That's sinking. They could have done a lot more with developing Goodison as Liverpool done with Anfield. I think Everton have made a very expensive call there. Very expensive judgment call where they decided to leave their spiritual home and go to a new stadium that's not in their traditional part of the city. I mean, the city is blue or red, so it's not going to affect the fan base too much. But to leave the traditional home, yeah. Do I think what Luke Little, a world champion? We'll have to see how his career progresses now that he's won the world title. And how many more titles and ranking events he wins. He could win a lot. He could be one of the most dominant players in his profession ever. Or it could be a flash in the pan and he's done by 21 and he's struggled. Some in the individualistic sports like snooker and tennis and sports like that, you can have some really talented players who burst on the scene, win some major titles, championships, and then they just can't replicate that initial success that they had in their early years, in their late teens, early 20s. And then afterwards, it's just a bit of a run-of-the-mill career. I hope that isn't the case. Do I think every club will move eventually? It's an interesting one. Some clubs have been at the same stadium their entire existence. Other clubs have moved several times or rebuilt and refurbed and moved into new stadiums. So it's a watch this space, but at some point, every facility will reach its point where it's old and needs completely replacing. So we'll see what happens there. Netflix have been very, very keen to get in on the live sports rights scene. They've had those YouTube boxing and they've got the WWE, which I think is their trial run for sports rights. But I think I think it's going to be interesting what the future holds. Sky will not always have the darts because we've seen the rise of streaming services and we've seen the rise of some sports leagues and organisations using YouTube as a free streaming platform where they can reach a wider audience. While Sky may have had the rights since 1994, the ownership of Sky has changed since it was B Sky B, now it's Comcast, and Comcast has made a lot of changes to the structure to Sky Sports and Sky TV in general. So watch this space in regards to Sky. It's not guaranteed that they're going to retain the rights indefinitely. There will become a point where another bidder comes along with more money, and Netflix and Amazon have a lot of money. Sky has a finite amount of money, and streaming services and YouTube could quite easily come along and say, we have an agreement, you can reach a wider audience, you can stream on here. That's what IMSA have now done. IMSA realised that a lot more people were watching the full race replays and engaging with their YouTube account. So they went, sod it, we'll experiment, which they did with the Sebring 12-hour last year. You know what, we're going to put every race live on YouTube now. We can reach a wider global audience, apart from the US, which is Geoblock. You have to watch on Peacock. And suddenly, there you go. Yeah, ITV, I'm having issues with ITVX right now. Whenever live sports on, it doesn't want to work for some reason. So the last couple have had some issues live streaming on ITVX when the live sports on. So the last round of the FA Cup, couldn't watch a game on ITV. And the Six Nations this weekend just gone, couldn't watch the 3 games because I wanted to watch 2 of them. Couldn't, it just didn't want to cooperate, didn't want to work. So I've had some issues with ITVX, and I think while it has been a very good streaming service until literally the last month, ITV again, while they're a free-to-air commercial broadcaster, they're limited because ad revenues are down. Ad revenues are down across the board when it comes to mainstream media and even social media. Ad revenues are down because the global economy isn't doing so well, and price rises are hurting everyone, even advertisers. And because the networks will charge rates for advertisers to advertise, that puts some of them off. And so it's the same. Well, I use YouTube Premium now, so I don't get ads anymore. I've had enough of ads. But advertisers are getting a bit cautious in regards to how much they're willing to spend on an advertising contract. And the broadcasters want to make as much money, commercial broadcasters want to make as much money as possible off ad revenue. And so, yeah, ITV may see some of their revenues struggle a little bit. And that's part of the problem with commercial broadcasting. Which is why a lot of these networks now have streaming platforms and memberships and streaming subscriptions for premium ad free, because they need to make up the money that they're not making off the ad revenue that's stagnating and dropping off in certain aspects. There's a finite amount of money, and so revenues are a bit concerning right now. A lot of broadcasters are actually laying off staff. Potentially, I mean, if you're a darts fan, you could look. I mean, the PDC will obviously look at all the options they have for their broadcast partners, and they want to get best value for money where they make as much money as possible for the TV and streaming rights. And those companies and broadcasters bidding want to get hold of the product to try and increase their own revenue when it comes to advertising and subscriptions in regards to their own viewership and their own economics of scale. I'm just going to move over here a little bit because my back's starting to hurt. So when you have a lot of interested parties interested in potentially obtaining the rights, that's a good sign. When you're having competitive rights negotiations where it's more than one broadcaster or streaming platform partner, media rights holder, I think is the best term to use. When you've got multiple interested parties, that's a sign that your product is a healthy product. When you're limited to just one or two tendering or putting bids up for contract or putting bids in for a broadcast rights contract, and you're limited in the broadcasters willing to put money on the table to pay for the rights, that's concerning. What you want is a very healthy rights deal on the table. Now, there's a point where you've got too many broadcasters. Sometimes just having the one broadcaster, maybe two, should suffice. And sometimes, I mean, look at the Premier League, for example. That's just got so many different fingers in the pie, and it's very expensive. I mean, look, I don't know what the actual prize money for the winner is. I think it's $500,000 right now. If it reaches that point where the prize money now becomes $1 million, that starts to change things because the broadcasters and the sponsors are starting to pump more money in, and it's becoming more profitable with ticket revenue and merchandise sales and concession sales. Bearing in mind the venues obviously need to take their share of the money. When it's starting to make more money, that's a healthy sign that economically that particular sport's doing quite well, and the prize money, for example, gets divvied up. It's like the NHL salary cap is due to explode over the next 3 years and be $20 million more than what it is now in the next 3 years. And in part, the NHL has made a lot more money because they've diversified how they make their money in regards to sponsorships and where the ad revenue comes from and their commercial partners, for good or for bad, and that's the betting companies in North America. And because darts is heavily reliant on the gambling industry is one of the few profitable industries right now that's making a lot of money. Now, whether we like gambling or not, it does help keep some professional sports financially stable, sustainable, and profitable. Simple. Without the gambling industry, horse racing would be on its arse completely. And we can debate the pros and cons of horse racing and animal welfare and all that argument, but certain sports would generally not be able to sustain themselves. They would not be able to sustain themselves, not just in the medium to long term, but in the short term. They would be on the verge of going bust. I think 2026 they are having 128 players too many. I mean, look, again, when you've got more matches being played, you get more fans in attendance, and the tournament can be an extra few days, for example. That's extra revenue. That is extra revenue. That's extra TV time. That's extra ad revenue. Extra personal sponsors on the players. It means more money. You can sell the rights for more money because you're now saying we're now broadcasting 128 players instead of 96. That's those extra matches, and suddenly that changes the dynamic because you've now got the rights are going to have to be worth more. More money goes into the sport. More advertising revenue gets into the sport. More sponsorship revenue gets into the sport. And that's something that you have to consider is the economic side of it and whether it is sustainable and the quality and the depth is actually there at the top level in the rankings. And that's a debate that the PDC's got to have. Is there enough talent depth for the World Championships to sustain that many players playing in singles and doubles? Well, of course, there has to be a limit. Otherwise, the tournament gets too big and takes too long. And you can't expect players to play multiple matches in a day. Well, you potentially could, but that would be mentally very, very taxing. And some of these matches go on for quite some time. And you need to get the seedings done and have the bracket done and then get to the final in a timely manner. Same with snooker. It's the same with tennis. It's the same with team sports like the World Cup, for example, football and rugby union World Cups, rugby league World Cup. The rugby league World Cup, they decided to contract and actually reduce the number of teams playing at the elite competition at the top at the World Cup because they felt they've expanded too fast, too quick, and it wasn't the best product on the field. And I think that is fair. Whereas rugby union and football, for example, have gone the other way. They're expanding quite regularly their tournament participation. And again, it's to do with money. Ad revenue, sponsorship revenue, and the broadcast side of things. The more games you can broadcast, the more money. Plain and simple. Again, you're playing one extra match. Again, that's extra games or matches that the broadcasters are going to have to bid for. The tournament's bigger, and so those TV rights are worth more money. The PDC can go to Sky and the other ITV and the other broadcasters, both here in the UK and globally. You're going to have to pay us more money for the TV rights or the media rights, and that means the prize pot actually goes up to $1 million. It's simple economics. The more matches you have, the more fans in attendance, the more tickets get sold, the more concessions get sold, the more merchandise gets sold. It's an economic driven thing. Now, whether the quality is there and we see the quality at the hockey is another thing. If it takes 3 weeks, it might take 3.5 weeks. Again, you can sell that to a broadcaster. Your tournament's now lasting an extra 3-4 days, extra week. You're going to have to pay us a little bit more to broadcast. But it does mean more fans in attendance, more tickets sold, and then the venue makes more money as well. So there is an economics of scale here that needs to be factored in. And it means the players, can win that little bit of extra prize money. Their personal sponsors get, more airtime themselves. And it's an economics of scale. And when you've got players like Luke Littler, for example, who have really taken that particular sport by storm and have, really back-to-back World Championship finals by the age of 17 is ridiculous, by the way. He's achieved so much in the sport for his young age, it's ridiculous. And I have no doubt by the time he retires, he's going to be a multi-millionaire if he manages his finances correctly and his career correctly and makes the right decisions and involves the right people advising him. He could be a very, 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 very successful young man. By the time he's 30, he could retire if he wants to and be set for life and not have to worry for anything, which would be nice. The office party brigade, Christmas parties. I mean, look, I personally myself am not a massive darts fan anymore. I used to be when I was younger, but I can see why it's a great fan sport. The atmosphere is fantastic. Whether we like that kind of lad stag do style of fandom, it works for the sport. The atmospheres are always really, really good. Sometimes you can hear a pin drop as well if at the right. Same as snooker, you can hear a pin drop at times. Well, this is where it strikes me on Sky Sports that it's suddenly become one of the most popular. They've obviously invested a lot into the TV rights. They've invested a lot of money, and they've decided, okay, we're going to really push this to sports fans. And it's also a trending sport right now because of Luke Littler and a few of these other younger players coming through since Phil Taylor's decided to hang the darts up. There's some characters in the sport that are driving it right now. So there is that. Yeah, I mean, look, there are certain aspects to the dart side of things that I do find a little bit childish and a little bit not it. But you do need to have a lot of characters. It's a sport which relies on the characters, and it does rely on the atmosphere. And at the same time, the players either thrive or struggle. Yeah, I mean, look, things like the O2 and Ali Pali, for example, are fantastic for the sport. Lakeside used to be. Getting the right venue can go a long way into selling your product when it comes to these major events. I wouldn't surprise me at some point darts really grows in the US. There was a time when some of the top darts players were American and Canadian. That's not the case at the moment. But if the US sports fan has bought into the Premier League, they're starting to buy into rugby league and rugby union. If we can get the US sports fan to buy into some other sports, it makes it big over there, and they buy in and they want to have, back their professional players, and have tournaments over there. Suddenly, the whole complexion changes because the top players are British, Australian, and Dutch. And they're the countries that are really driving the sport right now. But if they can get a foothold in the US sports market, suddenly you're going to see the finances of the sport completely change from £1 million prize money for the winner of the World Championship to God knows how much. And they haven't conquered the US yet. But the way that the sport's heading in Europe, we'll see what happens. The trouble in America, they do not play enough. Yeah, but there's enough British and Irish themed pubs and bars in America where you would think that it could become popular if they really got behind it and figured, and learnt the game. It's quite simple to play, and if you get it right, then yes. I mean, look, they pretty much invested in every other sport we can think of. Predominantly team sports, yes, but they've invested in a lot of other sports and they've taken to other sports really, really well. And it is a simple, cheap game to play and learn. You don't have to be a genius to play it. You've just got to be very accurate to do it. I think a lot of the US Northeast, like New England, New York, and Virginia upwards, basically. So the old 13 colonies, so the eastern seaboard, especially the northeast, it would do very, very well. Very, very well, because of the heritage of the Dutch and the British and the Irish. Places like Boston, Baltimore, New York, Providence, those kind of areas, I think it could do quite well. And there's a big population base there as well. It just takes one or two or three of those major metros to start getting behind the sport, that suddenly you might find traction, and then it can go from there. So we're talking the New England states, New York, Pennsylvania, things like that. Yeah, there have been some good American and Canadian players, but again, you know, I can't remember how they got into the sport, but there's been some great Canadian snooker players as well. But you just got to attract the fan base interest. The fan base interest. Once you start attracting American sports fans and encouraging American sports fans, then suddenly you're going to get people playing the sport. There's going to be an interest, and then they're going to want to have championships and title events over in America. And when that happens, when you can get Luke Littler to conquer the US, changes everything. Much like what Tiger Woods did in golf. Sorry, when Tiger Woods, similar age, burst onto the professional golf scene, golf was big. Golf was big in Europe and the US. Suddenly, it completely changed the dynamic because he was a marketable young man. Suddenly, the sponsors wanted to sponsor him, like Gillette and Nike, or Nike, depending on how they wanted to sponsor him. And he had a great career. Obviously, his off-course issues hampered him a little bit and still hamper him. But he was a marketable athlete in an individualistic sport, and he went global. Yeah, the Madison Square Garden. Yeah, but it doesn't seem that big, there is that. Popularity decline. I think that the division between the PGA and LIV golf, I think, hasn't helped. There's division there, and there's no unity there, and there's conflict within the sport and uncertainty within the sport. There's a lot of greed within the sport about the haves and have-nots, and the lesser ranked players, or those lesser known players, are struggling to make a living, which is going to put people off. But there's a lot of conflict and division within the sport. There's no unified governing body. It is the DP and PGA versus LIV, and the direction the sport's taking is a bit concerning. And there's been a lot of scandal surrounding certain players within golf in regards to what they get up to away from the course in their private lives, and it's a sport that's got a lot of division within it right now, which hurts the image of the sport. It does, and it's not the sport it was when I was growing up. Yeah, I'm not so fussed about the Masters anymore, and a part of that's to do with the TV rights. Yeah, paywall kills it to the wider audience. It kills the accessibility. There's nothing wrong with having a paywall. It's about how much you're charged for it. And unfortunately, it's a very niche sport anyway, and then you're making it more niche. And so younger fans or young kids can't really get exposed to it and understand what it's all about. And it's a very, I wouldn't say it's purely elitist, but it has that stereotype of being an expensive elitist sport where you've got to be a club member and you've got to know club members to get in as a get. It has that kind of reputation as a bit elitist. Any match fixing? Probably. I'll have to have a look into golf match fixing, but it's more individual player scandals with player misbehaviour that really hurts it. Yeah, I used to watch the Masters every year, and then the BBC decided to wind back their golf coverage, which I think has definitely hurt the sport here in this country. I don't know what the broadcast rights are like with other countries. And how much they pay, and how is it free to air? Is it behind a paywall? Is it half and half? So I can't comment on other countries in regards to their TV rights and how they organise those TV rights. But when the BBC decided to wind back their golf coverage and stop broadcasting things like that for me definitely hurt the sport's image and the accessibility of a sport that is already seen as quite patriarchal and elitist. It definitely hurt the sport's reach, and it hasn't recovered from that. And I don't think I don't know what the future holds for golf. It's a great sport. I used to work at a golf course at a golf club, so I I I enjoyed watching it. I like going on the driving range back when I went to the driving ranges and just having a relaxing, just drive some, go on the driving range and just hit through. And it was good to de-stress, just going on a driving range and just swinging the club at the ball and occasionally going out on the course and having like a little chip and putt and just have a bit of fun. And but it does seem that as I've got older, I've fallen out of love with it. It's one of those sports I've fallen out of love with over the years, and I don't enjoy anymore. And it's unfortunate because I used to go. I love going down the driving range, take my clubs, and just have fun. And it's just not a thing anymore. I live right by a golf course. I live what 15-minute walk from the nearest golf course. It's got a driving range, but unfortunately, it just doesn't interest me anymore. There's quite a few golf courses local to me, and I just have no interest in wanting to go to a driving range or playing anymore. It just does not interest me. There's another golf course. There's two golf courses near me, and I have no interest in going to either. Well, the World Rally Championship, I still keep tabs on it, but I'm not, again, not as invested in the World Rally Championship. I love my rallying, but the last couple of years I've completely tuned out. Again, it's to do with the TV rights and accessibility and marketing of the drivers and the cars and the events. And it's not. It just you got an action-packed form of motorsport that is not properly marketed to its fullest extent that could benefit the sport in a positive way. It's the best way I can describe rallying at the moment. And the WRC, in fact, all the rally competitions, they do seem to be a bit less popular than what they were, although in continental Europe, there's good fan following. You've got some loyal fans. The regional rally competitions and the local rallies do quite well, but unfortunately not marketed as well as they could be, which is a shame. The bowls, I think the BBC still broadcasts them. I used to watch it occasionally, and like my family used to think I was weird. I was like, no, it's sport, and I find it relaxing, and not marketed, and again, not advertised as well as it could be. But at the same time, that's quite a niche sport with a very, very niche fan base. Elfyn Evans came close in 2020. If the World Championship, he could have won the third British road driver to win. Yeah, Richard Burns and Colin McRae. Obviously, I remember both their title wins, and they were fantastic champions, and both sadly passed away too young. Richard Burns was actually a local lad to where I live and where I was brought up. He was local to the area where I live in England, but Colin McRae was a very marketable driver, and of course he did have his own series of video games. There was a couple of Colin McRae rally games, and I think it was Codemasters. I think it was a British game publisher. They really marketed that really well in the 90s and the 2000s. It was really well marketed, and it was really well targeted. There was a generation of kids and teenagers who knew who Colin McRae was, and Richard Burns for that matter. And they did the WRC in the 90s and the 2000s. The marketing was spot on. They knew that in order to continue to grow the fan base and the interest, video games was a way to go, and they nailed that. They nailed that really, really well. Somehow, it sort of lost its way in the 2010s, and in part that was to do with the TV rights, and they just didn't have, with Sebastian Loeb winning all the time. That, unfortunately, I think, while he's a great driver, he's also a great rallycross driver now. It wasn't marketed in the same way. There was an opportunity when Red Bull and Monster and some of these big energy drink companies came along in the late 90s, early 2000s and started sponsoring a lot of motorsport. It was a great opportunity to continue the Colin McRae style marketing, where they go, right, we've got a very, very entertaining, exciting, explosive driver who really pushes the boundaries of the car. In McRae's case, initially was Subaru, then he went to Ford. We can really market this. And I think they got their marketing strategy slightly wrong. And then we get Ken Block. And Ken Block brought rallying to North America in the sense that it already existed, but he really brought World Rally to North America. And a lot of North American motorsport fans who didn't really follow rallying, suddenly there's an American doing this and doing this well. And he's a well-known figure in extreme sports. And suddenly you have a marketable asset. And again, he's another rally driver who sadly died far too young. And well, they definitely used Ken Block in a good way to market their brand. They didn't use him as to the full effectiveness of which they could. And that's down to the advertising and promotional agencies that they have and the broadcast deals they have in place. As we're going along, sport is becoming more and more reliant on the subscription service and the paywall. And, you know, sponsors and advertisers are more cautious now than what they were 15, 20 years ago in regards to how much money they pump in because of the financial issues we've had since 2007, 2008. Yeah, look, when you've got big name manufacturers like Mitsubishi and Subaru and Skoda, Peugeot, you know, real household rallying names, not willing to put money into a factory team anymore, it tells you all you need to know about where rallying is at the WRC. At the more regional and national championships, have multiple manufacturers, but when at the top level, you've only got 3 car companies willing to put a car into the field. That's not a good sign. That's a very worrying sign when you've got a limited manufacturer base. But when you look at things like IMSA and the World Endurance Championship, where you've got, I think IMSA's got 17 different car manufacturers under its umbrella of racing categories. That's a healthy sign. When you've got the WRC and its support categories, where you've only got 3 manufacturers making cars, that's worrying. And that says to me that when it comes to motorsport, they're not targeting rallying anymore as a way to develop cars. They're looking at endurance racing when it comes to the IMSA and WEC and European and Asian Le Mans series. And that's troubling when you have a point where it's clear and obvious that the motorsport and motor vehicle manufacturing has just gone off rally. They're not investing anymore, and they're cutting back spending into that part of their motorsport arm. That's a problem, because back in the day you had Mazda, Mitsubishi, Suzuki, Volkswagen, Skoda, Peugeot, Citroen, obviously Ford, Subaru. You could list off car companies. You could list them off, and now it's three of them. It's a very worrying turn of events, in my opinion. Back in 2001, when Richard Burns won the championship, there were seven manufacturers: Citroen, Skoda, Hyundai, Mitsubishi, Subaru, Ford, and Peugeot. Yeah, there you go. I had to laugh at the other day. Booth on a pin and feet. Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, he's been playing that long as a professional that he's seen every iteration of the FIFA games, basically, which is generally terrifying. That's 25 years of being in the game. Video games. Rugby 2007 was a good one. Rugby 2007 was a real good game on the Xbox 360 and the I think it was PS3, Xbox 360 platforms. I enjoyed that one. Did enjoy that one. I think it was the last rugby union game they released. Rugby leagues had a couple since then, but rugby union, that was the last one I can think of that EA Sports had the rights, because the Rugby Union World Cup was taking place at the time. And I think that was the last decent one that was done. I can't think of any since then. I think in 99 and 2003, I think they had games as well. But the 2007 one was, I think, stands the test of time, as being, when it was made, pretty decent. Not the greatest, but pretty decent. Yeah, I mean, marketing. Video games is a good way for sports to market themselves and market their athletes, who are very, very marketable for advertisers and sponsors. Some sports do it a lot better than others. So now we're seeing the Netflix, Amazon style fly on the wall documentary, which is becoming more prevalent. Yeah. Oh, no, they don't make rugby union games often. And there's a lot to do with it. World Rugby has a lot to do with it. Domestic unions have a lot to do with it. And yeah, I mean, that is an issue that needs to be looked at. A lot of it's to do with licensing, and the player images and the player rights, and how much the players would get, and how much the World Rugby and the domestic unions would get. And no video game manufacturer has been brave enough to want to, share, invest and then do it. And again, World Rugby could make a lot of money out of it. And that money could be well served by rugby union right now. Am I looking forward to it? It's a World Cup, so I'm going to be watching it. I do think it's going to be interesting how the different conditions from Canada down to Mexico will impact play. The time zones will impact viewing figures. I do seem to vaguely remember USA 94 and it not being the best quality. There were a lot of upsets in USA 94, but goals per game average was not great. I don't think I'll be able to watch all 104 games. That'll be a lot of video. That will be the final group stage games. I won't be able to watch all of them. I'll have to cherry pick. So 70 plus games. I don't think I have enough notebooks for that. That'd be a whole notebook just for a World Cup. That'd be a lot of content. I'll be exhausted. I wouldn't be able to, not with my day job, not with the time zone difference as well. Although with the Brazil World Cup, that's a lot of late finishes. And bear in mind, with my current work, my current day job now, if I'm still there, that's a lot of early starts that I've got, and I've got to try and factor that in. And I'm not using all my annual leave just for the World Cup. I might try and I'm going to try and catch as many games as possible. It's the same with the Women's World Cup. I'm going to try and catch as many games as possible. That's the best I can do. I'm physically just not going to be able to watch every single game. I think that could be quite interesting actually, with the expanded format, more nations spread over 3 countries and basically a whole continent. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, and are we going to see blowout scores? Are we going to see more close games? Some players we haven't seen on the international stage. It's going to be interesting. Whether it's good or bad, I don't know until we actually see the tournament. But what we saw with the Copa America recently, with the quality of pitches and the security concerns and the stadiums, it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out, and who qualifies for the knockout stages and how the knockout stages go, and what upset. There's going to be upsets. There's going to be upsets. Well, the women's Euros, it's going to be interesting to see how the Euros goes. Obviously, England are defending champions. Spain are World Cup champions. They're, for my opinion, two of the favourites. I think Germany are trying to rebuild because they have not been the same team that they were back in the day. It's going to be fun. We might see some upsets here as well. We may see some upsets in the women's game because the women's game has evolved so quickly. So quickly, the women's game has evolved. And again, I'm going to try and watch as much of that as possible as well. And Switzerland, I think, is a good location because it's not as hot in the summer. You've got a bit of an altitude, taking a little bit of tempering the temperatures. And the backdrop in Switzerland with the Alps is fantastic, and the Jura Mountains and the Visage. I mean, you've got 3 mountain ranges. The Alps, the biggest one, but then you've got the Jura and the Visage Mountains as well, which contribute lovely to the when you've got a backdrop like that, mountain backdrop. It's a beautiful country. I've been to Switzerland. It's a beautiful country, and I think it's it's an appropriate host nation for the tournament with the facilities they have and the amount of and the quality of the women's game where it is. I think it works very well. I think the stadiums will be at really decent capacity, and this is a country that does put a lot of focus on their women's sport and really funds their women's sport really well. So I'm expecting crowd numbers to be good and to be a decent tournament. I really do think that. I really do, and it'd be interesting to see how England defend their title, if they do defend their title, and if they do, Serena Wiegmann's done something ridiculous. If she can get us to 3 finals in a row, I know she's Dutch, but she can be an honorary Brit for a while, and she's a fantastic coach. More German speakers in Switzerland. French is the second most spoken language out of the 4 official languages. Then it's Italian, then it's Romansh. I've spent a lot of time in Switzerland. I've been all over Switzerland. It's a fantastic country, a very interesting country. And the 4 linguistic regions are all very distinct as well. Very, very distinct with the dominant language in each area. But German for the most part, and then French is the second most spoken, Italian the third, and Romansh is the 5th. But every school kid in Switzerland will learn German, and then their regional language, be it French, Italian, or Romansh. But they will learn German, and then they have a choice of learning, depending where they are, French, Italian, or Romansh as well as a secondary or tertiary language. Federer, I think he's from the French, the Geneva, Lausanne, kind of the French-speaking area. Yeah, I mean, look, there was a lot of criticism from the fans about the quality of officiating, the security levels, the quality of pitches wasn't great. They experimented with some rule changes. Fans weren't overly impressed with the quality of product on display. The quality wasn't great, much like the Africa Cup of Nations. It left a lot to be desired. Last year, it wasn't the best tournament. It got a lot of negative feedback from fans, and there was it wasn't great. It wasn't a great spectacle, and there was a lot of negative headlines that came out, which is concerning going into the World Cup next year. A smaller tournament, they didn't do very well. Now, that's not to say that in Canada and Mexico that they won't have issues because obviously Canada and Mexico weren't part of the Copa America in regards to being a host nation. That was the US, but it didn't look good for the US. It was quite embarrassing. And that's something that they don't want to happen again, to be shown up to be at amateur hour, because when the European and South American fans turn up in big numbers, much bigger numbers than the fans that were there, it's going to be interesting to see how they cope with that. Oh yeah, the FIFA Club World Cup, which I will not be watching because I think it's not good for the sport. It's only going to enrich a handful of clubs and a handful of very wealthy owners, and it will take money out of the sport. Really, it's a cash grab by FIFA. Again, there's a lot of issues in Mexico on a social and economic level, yeah, there's a lot going on in Mexico. It's unfortunate what's happening in Mexico, but there's a lot going on. That makes the headlines for all the wrong reasons, which is a shame, and that does impact the quality of the sport we see as well. When you've got all these off-field issues, there is corruption, there's a lot of crime, there's a lot of deprivation, a lot of social problems, and that contributes to the decline. It does contribute to the decline because Mexico's had some brilliant players represent them, and some brilliant players have played for Mexico, and some fantastic skill, technical ability. Latin America, I mean, it's football or baseball in Latin America. Mexico is more of a football country, whereas places like Costa Rica and Panama, for example, are more baseball. But again, when you see them players play, they have great technical ability, and it's always very interesting. Do I know which football nation has the best average attendance or the best football club? God, it's going to be it's going to be somewhere in Latin America or Europe, with some of the big stadiums we have, like the Nou Camp and Barcelona and things like that. But it wouldn't surprise me if it was in Brazil or Mexico. It really wouldn't surprise me if it was in Brazil or Mexico, if I'm being honest. But I honestly could not tell you. I couldn't tell you who has the highest average stadium capacity. I think the best way to look at average attendance is not by actual numbers, but by stadium. Oh, it's obviously going to be Boca Juniors or River Plate or something ridiculous like that, or Neville's Young Boys. It's going to be like Rosario or something ridiculous like Boca or River Plate. There you go. But then are you talking about percentage of stadium capacity, or are you talking about fans in attendance, paid attendance, or actual attendance? Because there's different ways of looking at it. Because some clubs have smaller stadiums than others, but regularly sell out, where some of the clubs with bigger stadiums have a lot of empty seats. So how are you working out best average attendance? Are we talking about stadium capacity, or are we talking about fans actually in the stadium? And in River Plate's case, in a death trap because their stadium is falling apart, literally falling apart. But yeah, they've got a. Is it the Bombonera or is that Boca? The Bombonera, is that Boca Juniors? I'm going to have to do a video on some of the South American football histories on some of the South American clubs, because honestly, it's ridiculous. Character, they're terrifying. It's an experience, and it's something I would love to do is experience the South American football experience. But apparently, it's very, very dangerous, and it's not for the faint of heart, and you've really got to be brave. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, the national stadium in what, Boca versus River Plate, or Fluminense versus Santos. There you go, in Brazil. And then you've got Juventude in I believe it's Juventude in Montevideo, and you've got some big clubs. You've got Nacional in, I think it's in Bogota or Cartagena, that Rena Higuita used to play for, and there's some big clubs in South America in regards to fans and attendance, and Penarol, and yeah, there's some ridiculous. Yeah, it's just South American football is something else. Their fans are something else. And I think wasn't that Pablo Escobar? He owned the team, didn't he? Or he had shares in the team. Um, it should be, yeah, it should be. But then when you get the second Bundesliga, Hamburg versus Hertha Berlin with over 70,000 in attendance, which is ridiculous in itself for a Division Two game, it just tells you that there's some fanatical fan bases out there across the world. But South American football is something to behold. It is ridiculous. And I've got to do some football club histories on some of the South American clubs. That'll be a lot of fun. That will be a lot of fun. And I think I'll start in Uruguay, the first ever World Cup winners, and then we'll go into Brazil and Chile and Argentina and Peru and Ecuador and all over. And there are some fantastic clubs in South America that may not be household names here, but if you look at them, some of them have got ridiculous histories with a lot of trophies won and a lot of success, and be fun to look at the South American teams and the Central American teams. It'd be so much fun, so much fun. Palmeiras, Botafogo, yeah, there's loads of them. I could be here all day. And yeah, there's so many to look at. I mean, it's just ridiculous when you think about it and look into it. The rivalry between the clubs in Rio and Sao Paulo, for example, the rivalry between Rosario and Buenos Aires, the clubs in Buenos Aires, the rivalries in Montevideo, for example, the rivalries in Colombia and Bolivia, and just so many to look at. It's going to be a lot of fun when we do delve into it and look at the South American and Central American clubs and their league systems and the history behind them. I don't think enough YouTubers look at that. They'll look at Boca Juniors and River Plate and some of the big Argentine and Brazil clubs, and they just overlook a lot. And there is a lot to look at. You've named quite a few, but there's a lot, and some of them have got some really interesting histories and stories behind them, like how they came about. And South American football is ridiculous. It is a lot of fun, and it's something that's worth looking into. And God, I'm going to have some fun in this summer, looking at some of the clubs from the Southern Hemisphere. Really going to be a lot of fun. Atletico Nacional, that's the one. That's the one in Colombia and Cartagena. And René Higuita used to play for him. I think Valderrama used to play for him as well. So there's some really interesting football clubs in South America to look at, and they're going to be a lot of fun to look at and delve into. There's Barcelona of Ecuador. That is true. There's an Arsenal as well. I think there's an Arsenal in. Is there an Arsenal in Montevideo, in Uruguay? There is some ridiculous club names and some very interesting club histories and success, and some very crazy fans and ultras. Oh God. There is a Liverpool, yes. I think there's an Everton as well, and you can see the English connection, or the UK, the British connection to the clubs in South America, and that's something I've got to look at. There's a Juventud. There's some very interesting club names and club histories about how they get their club colours and their club name and their culture and why they. There's Juventud is one that I know of. There's quite a few. It's going to be interesting, as I say, to delve into it and have a look at the clubs and the history and the ups and the downs. So we'll have a look at it, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be a lot of fun. And something to look forward to as part of the quieter summer, as I put it, when it comes to content. And so the Football Club History series is going to continue, but there's a lot of European leagues I need to look at and clubs to look at, and it's a fun series. It's a great way when it's quieter in regards to certain sports in the summer, just to entertain myself, do the research, and really have some fun, and engage with viewers from all around the world. I've noticed the engagement when I do the German clubs and the Swiss clubs was really good, and the Italian clubs. There's a lot of Scandinavian clubs that I need to do, but I've had really great engagement doing it, and you get viewers all over the world, and it's fun. The Portuguese clubs got really good feedback, the ones I've done, and there's still more to do. And there's Belgium and Holland and Denmark and Poland and Czech Republic and Slovakia and the Balkan nations. There's always more clubs to look at. Africa, Morocco and Tunisia and Algeria and Egypt, definitely. The North African leagues are quite fun. And Vasco da Gama. Well, Vasco da Gama himself is quite a very important Portuguese figure historically. So yes, that's why you get the Portuguese link there. Vasco da Gama is a very important Portuguese explorer from the early days of exploration. I think he was the guy that found Brazil. Went there first. So there's a reason why they're called Vasco da Gama. But we'll have a look at them. We'll have a look at them, and we're going to find some very interesting facts. And there's going to be some fun records to look at there, some interesting stats to look at, highest attendances, trophies won, great players, club records. I've not done any of the MLS. I've done videos on the MLS. I've not actually looked at the history of LA Galaxy or San Jose Earthquakes, for example. I haven't looked into that, or the Portland Timbers, but I can always look into it. There are some teams who haven't had any success, who are just existing in the MLS. So there's that. And that'll be interesting to look at the MLS. It'll be interesting to look at the Caribbean clubs, Central American leagues. Like Costa Rica regularly qualify for the World Cup, so they've got to have a decent league system. So that'll be interesting to look at the Costa Rican league and the quality of Costa Rican football. Because, as I say, some Brian Ruiz and Paulo Onshot, for example, great players. And Jamaica as well. Jamaica is going to be fun to look at because Trinidad and Tobago and Costa Rica, Mexico will be fun. The Liga Mex will be quite interesting to look at. The Mexican league. So yeah, there's always clubs to look at, and I'm looking forward to seeing what I'll learn about a lot of clubs that I've never heard of before. I know a few of the South American clubs, as I say, but looking at some of the Central American ones would be fun. Some of the Caribbean clubs would be fun, and it's going to be an eye opener when we delve into Mexico southwards. I think. So Latin America is going to be fun. It's going to be a hell of a lot of fun. And I'm going to start with some of the small nations like your Ecuadors, your Perus, Costa Ricas, Panamas, because their league structure is very similar to what we have in Europe here. Brazil and Argentina have a weird league structure. And so I've done Boca Juniors, and I think I've done a couple of Argentine clubs. So I'm going to look at some of the smaller South American nations that have a more simple league structure. And then we'll go to the Brazil and Argentina a bit later. But there is some very, very, very interesting club histories to look forward to. But that's a video series continuation for another day. And as I say, they're always great fun to do, always. But I want to continue with some of the European clubs before I delve into Uruguay and Argentina and Brazil and Mexico and Costa Rica. But it's going to be fun, and we're going to unearth some really interesting clubs. And I'm not really fussed about the view counts on them. They're just fun to do. They are fun to do. Malta now have a similar league structure to Brazil and Argentina. Okay, a summer league and a winter league. Okay, it's interesting. Should all the Americas, North and South, unite for the MLS clubs to play in the Copa Libertadores? It's an interesting one if they do that. It'd be interesting. But that, again, CONMEBOL and CONCACAF would have to come to some kind of arrangement in order for that to happen, where all the leagues, not just the MLS, but all the leagues would have to come to some kind of, with the clubs and the governing bodies, would have to definitely work together to try and bring that to the table. And there's the potential for a lot of money to be made there, and the quality. I mean, that would be an interesting competition. Europe is still the top dogs, but that would be a very, very interesting competition if you were to add the MLS and the Central American leagues into the Copa Libertadores. I mean, that would change how teams qualify for it and how many teams would be playing in it. And you've got to think of, is that a sustainable competition to have? Would it be similar to what we've seen with the European Champions League format changing, just to keep a handful of clubs on side with UEFA and stop a European Super League, which is an Americanization of something which we're pushing back against. And even the American fans realise that wasn't a good idea. Well, the Faroe Islands, I could do the Icelandic League. That's a decent league to look at because there's only 10 clubs in it and there's only one division. So we could do Iceland. That'd be interesting. Try to pronounce some of the Icelandic club names. That could be a lot of fun. And again, I'm more than happy to give that a go. No, they don't all play in Reykjavik. That's something that people think occurs. It doesn't. There are some teams outside of Reykjavik that play in the Icelandic league system. Keflavik being one, because Keflavik is a separate city. And there's a few others that play outside Reykjavik. There's only 10 teams in the league, so Football Manager taught me that. But I could definitely do the Icelandic clubs. That would be a lot of fun, actually, considering this is the land of Heide Haridason and Ida Gudjonsson. So, FH, and good old FM. FH is the biggest club in Iceland, and Football Manager. Yes, and Championship Manager was the other one, which was the rival game. Marine Football Club is seeking to build a community stadium of 5,000 featuring a 3D pitch, community hub, health hub, and gymnasium. It'd be interesting if they can actually get the funding for that and make that a sustainable business model with the level they actually play at. It'd be interesting if that was actually sustainable and makes the club self-sufficient, because the non-league, so many clubs are hand to mouth at best. So many clubs are going bust down there. It'd be interesting to see if they can make that sustainable and make that work for them. Considering that they've got to compete in that part of the world with a lot of bigger clubs just to get fans through gate and players to want to play for them and be part of the Football League structure. I believe they are, yes. Bearing in mind you've got Southport, Tranmere, obviously Liverpool and Everton. There's some bigger clubs that have bigger fan bases and better finances than they do, which can attract better players, and so it's hard. They did play Spurs. I think it was in Gareth Bale's loan season at Spurs. They did play. I think they lost 5-0. And no, Tranmere is Birkenhead. Tranmere is the Wirral. And I think they get overlooked as a football club. I mean, all the videos I've done on Tranmere have actually done really well. The videos I've done on Tranmere have done really, really well. And Prenton Park is a fantastic little stadium, very intimate stadium where you're very close to the pitch, and so you've got a very intimidating. When Prenton Park is sold out, it's an intimidating atmosphere. When it's sold out, and Tranmere are a decent sized club who could and should be potentially playing at a higher level. In my opinion, they've had their ups and their downs, and they have fallen out of the Football League. They draw it from North Wales, like from Flintshire, Cheshire, bits of Merseyside that don't follow Liverpool or Everton, because not all of Merseyside is Liverpool or Everton. They're the next club off the rank. So bits of the Wirral, bits of Cheshire, bits of Flintshire, and up to Rill. They will draw fans. They've got a wide catchment area for fans, but they're competing against Liverpool and Everton for fans in Merseyside. And Dixie Dean used to play for Tranmere, by the way, the greatest English striker of all time, who holds many records. No, Wrexham is more north central Wales. Wrexham is on the other side of North Wales, so that's more near Shropshire. So Tranmere and Wrexham, that doesn't really have the same rivalry as Wrexham Shrewsbury. It could have a rivalry, it's potential, but it's just not really built upon. Great story on Saturday. Sittingbourne FC beat Southend United in the last 16 of the FA Trophy, and their 3 divisions. Southend United are a mess. That's a club I've got to do a football club history on, and their collapse from the Football League down to the non-league. That's definitely a club I need to do a football club history on. I think the video views on that, the view count on that would be quite good, actually. But that's something I definitely need to look at. Is doing a video on Southend United and where the club are at now and the history of the club, because they're in a right mess. Tranmere is an interesting one. I've got to revisit. I'll have to look at the history video I did on Tranmere and where the club's at and bits and pieces. Yes, I also remember when Southend and Colchester were in the Championship. Oh my, how times change. But again, that's bad ownership. That's some bad investment decisions and a lot of managerial turnover, some really poor off-field decisions taken. Same with Scunthorpe United. Remember they were in the Championship. Some bad decisions have been taken in ownership and finances by the club that have led the club to where they are now and the situation they're in. And so, yeah, Yeovil were in the Championship. Hereford will. Yeah, there's some clubs have been really badly run, and you can't just say money's tight at the lower level when you're being badly run and money's being misspent and you're losing funds because of bad ownership. Bad ownership is a massive problem. Now Yeovil are on the comeback and they're strengthening again, but Hereford had to reform. Southend narrowly avoided going bust. Oldham narrowly avoided going bust. Scunthorpe narrowly avoided going bust. These are all clubs that have been in the Championship, and in Oldham's case, the Premier League. Macclesfield, yeah, this is a massive problem. This is not just COVID-induced. This has been going on for a long time. Is it worrying we could see 3 promoted teams from the Championship get relegated from the Premier League this season? I think Luton were, surprised to win the playoff final and get there, and they performed the best out of the 3 promoted sides. I'm not sure the 3 promoted sides will go straight. Southampton had it, but I think Ipswich and Leicester will give it a good crack to stay up. Plus, there are some teams above them who are in free. Spurs are in free fall. Wolves aren't doing particularly well. And so there's the potential for 2 of the 3 to stay up. stranger things have happened, and Spurs are in trouble. Man United are in trouble. Wolves are in trouble. And so, yeah, there's some other clubs that are not doing particularly well right now, whose form is quite worrying and trending in the wrong direction. And Spurs being one of them, Man United being another one. So Wolves, yeah, there's some other clubs struggling at the moment, and so watch this space. But we'll see. Am I watching any of the Four Nations? No. I think it's a flawed format. I prefer the World Championships, if I'm being honest. It reminds me of the World Cup of Hockey that the NHL had. I'm going to say, was it 2016 or 2017? And yeah, I mean, I remember the World Cup of Hockey, I think in 2004, 2005, I think we had before the lockout. It's an NHL driven concept, which means we're not getting all of the players available who could play. Those players who play outside the NHL are not going to be eligible for the rosters. It's going to be NHL rosters, basically, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I prefer watching the World Championships because you get a different style, you get a mix of styles where you get an NHL player playing alongside an SHL player or a Liga player, for example. I'll keep an eye on the results, and I'll keep an eye on how certain players are doing, and we'll see who comes out on top out of the Four Nations. But I think it is a flawed concept because there's some good players playing outside the NHL who, in my opinion, if that was a World Championships, are on their World Championship roster. So, but that's my opinion on that. I remember Rushden and Diamonds. Again, I could definitely do a video on Rushden and Diamonds and the rise and fall. There's a lot of clubs that have gone belly up. And again, a lot of it's to do with really bad ownership and some really bad decisions taken and finances. And Billy Sharp played for Rushden and Diamonds back in Billy Sharp has played for a lot of clubs. Billy Sharp has been around for near enough 20 years as a professional. He's a very interesting player to look at and look at his stats. And I will have to look at Rushden and Diamonds, the rise and fall. And there's a few clubs I could do videos on who've had the highs and lows. And so, yeah, there's, again, more video ideas. But Billy Sharp has been around for a long time. And the fact he played for Rushden and Diamonds is quite surprising, actually, but he's played for a lot of clubs. He's had a very long career. And he's played, I think he's one of the few players to score in every single division plus the non-league alongside Grant Holt and Jamie Vardy, amongst others. So, and Ricky Lambert. I think he's one of the few players to have scored in the 4 Football League and Premier League divisions plus the non-league. So he's one of a handful of players to do that. And yeah, interesting player to look at is Billy Sharp. But there's a few players who've had some very interesting journeyman careers who actually are very good players. They just seem to bounce around a little bit. I might do a few career videos on some of the players that I grew up watching, like your Dion Dublins, your Darren Huckabees, your Marcus Stewarts, who ended up at Yeovil, finished his career at Yeovil. So there's some really, really interesting players that I could do career videos on who've retired. Grant Holt being another one, Ricky Lambert. When Jamie Vardy retires, it'd be interesting to look at Jamie Vardy's career and things like that. Marcus Stewart. I'll have to look into Marcus Stewart. He was a brilliant player back in his day. And I know he finished his career at Yeovil. And when he was at Ipswich, the first season in the Premier League for Ipswich, he was fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. Grant Holt was a good player. Underrated player, in my opinion. I've got to do a career on him. And when Jamie Vardy finally decides to retire, I think I've got to do a career video on Jamie Vardy. I've done one on Muzzy, is it? Another Leicester legend. Jamie Vardy's definitely going to have to be a player I do a career video on because he's such an iconic player. And it'll be kind of fun. Anyway, I'm just gonna leave the live stream there tonight. It's been good fun, some interesting questions. It's not often I do a weekday live stream, but I thought I had a bit of time, and it was a nice little evening live stream because I didn't do one over the weekend because I wasn't here, and I was planning to do one on Sunday, but I was so tired. I was gone by like 7, 8 o'clock. I was asleep, um, and so keep your eyes peeled for a potential. I know there's a lot of live sport, but balance the FA Cup with the Six Nations. So I'll try and do my best to try and cover as much live sport this weekend as I can. But yeah, it's been a good live stream. A lot of really interesting questions. And but from me for now, thank you very much for watching. And yeah, I'm going to keep a regular upload schedule now. Try and do a minimum of a video per day. And yeah, so I will be looking at potentially doing some club histories actually. And they could be fun when it's at this period in between live sport events when it's a bit quiet. Now the transfer window's closed before the FA Cup this weekend. I might. That'd be fun when we get to the South American videos. They're going to be fun. But I might do Iceland next just for giggles because Iceland will be easy because there's only 10 clubs. And yeah, and so we'll have a look. But for me, for now, very much for all the questions this evening. And yeah, keep your eyes peeled. We've got the NRL pre-season games, trial matches starting this weekend. So the NRL season's only what 3 weeks away, 4 weeks away, and then the Vegas games. So there's a build up to that. We've got the NHL trade deadline coming. The Super Bowl. There's a lot to keep our eyes on. But for me, for now, thank you very much for watching, and I'll have some more content for you guys and girls very, very soon.